To me, underlying meaning, yeah, is kind of what you mentioned in the sense of what does it mean. But I think that uh, meaning, I think, is what people are really after when they're
Mm.
looking for purpose.
Hmm.
When we're looking for, um, say, occupation, life orientation, all these things give us when we're aligned. The feeling of being aligned is that it's meaningful, and that's, I think, the problem that sometimes we have with looking at the whole idea of meaning is we see it in abstract terms, in these overly rational terms. Like
Yeah.
you got to give this definitive meaning. This means this, rather than meaning is really an experience of being. And when we're aligned, like it feels meaningful. We don't, when we're really aligned, when we're connected with purpose, we don't have this feeling like, oh, life doesn't matter and my life doesn't matter and there's no, and just who cares, and you're born, you live, and you die, and there's nothing nihilistic about meaning. And yet I certainly know in my case, this is one of the things that made it, where the reasons why it was a discovery to really tease out meaning, is because for me, meaning has always been almost exclusively an experience of being, a
Mm.
meaningful experience of being. And when it's happening, when the intentionality is no longer necessary, then you're not even teasing out meaning in any kind of intellectual way. It's almost like you're living it more than you are thinking about it. But I do think that underneath everything, or a lot of things, certainly most of our efforts to have orientation in our lives and purpose in our lives, that, like you say, they're almost the same term, but not quite. It's hard to exactly say what's different about them. But like I said, I think it's an experience of being, and meaning is also derived through our interpretation. So what I've noticed as a spiritual teacher, you can have, you know, 5 people have very similar spiritual kind of experience, and they can have 5 different meanings that they derive from it, right? One person can say, I've experienced vast emptiness, and it's totally beyond the world of time and space. And therefore, here comes the meaning, and therefore, well, time and space isn't really important, and who cares? It's not ultimate. And so that's one interpretation. Somebody has a very similar expense and says, from the view of emptiness, when I look back into what we formerly called the world, I now see it as an intimate expression of the very being that I realized. And therefore it has almost it seems to have something akin to almost infinite meaning or value.
Mm.
And those are two, those can come out of the same experience. So one of the things that I've seen as a spiritual teacher, the end of this that I look at, is having an experience, whether it's a spiritual experience or a purposeful experience or whatever it is, that's one thing. But we also, I think, have to remember that we can be very conditioned around the meanings that we ascribe to them.
Mm.
If we have a whole background of challenge and difficulty, and that just from a very young age made us question the very worthwhileness of life, we may be predisposed to interpreting a given experience, even a spiritual experience, as in a particular way, right? Like, okay, it's beyond life and death. Life and death doesn't have much meaning. It's not very significant. And then you act that way. And so I think so 2 things. I think number one, it's important to realize, like, okay, a lot of meaning is based on how I'm interpreting my experience. I mean, even to say that to express love is that love and truth are important to you,
Mm-hmm.
as I think you said, right? That they're also very meaningful things. When you tell your little boy that you love him and he smiles at you, I would say you're having a meaningful experience of that, a connected, aligned moment where it just feels like yes.
Mm.
And to me, that's meaning. It's not something abstract that says,
Mhm.
here's the meaning of life.
Yeah.
I have no relationship to that kind of statement whatsoever because it seems an abstraction. But that other connected feeling is what I just feel is the undercurrent of so much of what we're looking for in our lives, in our relationships, in our work, that it feels worthwhile. It feels, like you mentioned, there's certain artists that were never discovered in their whole life. Right? Nobody appreciated anything they did, and then sometime after they died, now their paintings are sold for $100 million. But they themselves knew that for them to paint was a meaningful experience. It lit their lives up.
Mm.
And nobody else appreciated it. But if it lights their lives up, then for them, it's a meaningful experience. It's worthwhile. And the last thing is, I think that what we all need to do, because life can be a tough encounter, right? And for some people, much tougher than others. But even for those who are lucky and have good fortune and all that kind of stuff, still, life is a bumpy ride. It has an unavoidable, tragic component. You're going to lose people you love. You're going to lose jobs. You can get sick. You can get abused. I mean, the list of things that can be, let's say, somewhere between challenging and horrendous is almost endless. And I think that we do need something that we feel connected enough with that makes us feel like this is all worthwhile, with all the challenges, or with all the challenges that I've ever been through in my whole life, that I've discovered something that's intrinsic to me and to life that seems to justify the incredible challenges of living, and then makes it seem and feels worthwhile. And there's something like that, I think, because, as Buddha said, suffering is a part of life. That a way of being that has to do with what you're talking about and what you're helping people with around purpose guiding, that has their life light up with meaning. And so that with all the challenges that everybody's going to face in their lives, that on any particular day, they feel like, yes, they feel like doing this or experiencing this or being inspired by this justifies the tremendous difficulties and challenges of life. And maybe even more than justifies them, right? Makes them kind of light up in some odd way. Because that's a force that I think is at work in anybody's life. It's often not conscious. I mean, everybody's conscious of the challenges of living, but they're not often conscious of how that fact of life is putting a pressure on your experience of meaning. Because, if you have enough challenge, all of a sudden life doesn't seem meaningful anymore. It's like, what's the point? It's like that's why I think what we're challenging as a culture. We have a meaning and purpose challenge in our entire culture, right? That's why our suicide rates are skyrocketing, and that's why people are coming to you, and that's why they're coming to me, right? Because they're not getting in their culture something that gives their lives orientation enough to make it seem deeply meaningful and worthwhile. And so they're reaching out like, hey, there's got to be more to this than what I've gotten from my culture. And of course, they're
Absolutely.
right. There's not only more to it, there's almost infinitely more to it.
Like
anyway, that's my little thought on meaning, though. This has been a big evolution because, as you know, earlier, years ago, I would say I didn't really relate to meaning or purpose.
I remember.
And I would say, and I think a lot of what people do with meaning and purpose is a sort of surrogate, or a connection. And I think in that was a truth, because when you have connection, then you have meaning. And when you have disconnection, you start to lack meaning. So in a certain sense, there was a truth to that connection and meaning and purpose. But I think to say there's surrogates, I wouldn't necessarily say that now. Although I still think they can be used as surrogates. So we can look for, there's certain kinds of purposeful things we can almost try to put on the kind of void inside of us.
Yeah.
Pile it on top so I don't have to feel it. Whereas I think what you're talking about is, hey, you might have to just, you might look into that void. There might be something there that's worthwhile for you. That might be part of the key to your whole life. That might be where part of your vitality and your inspiration is going to come from. So I think we can, if we have a surface way of looking at purpose, we can use it as a surrogate. But it's certainly not only or always a surrogate. I think it can be, like in the way you are presenting it, the way I've been trying to present, especially around meaning, is that it can be an expression of, in my world, it can be an expression of your realization.
Yeah.
And that's different. I think that's something that feels more connected.